they're essential tools for birding. They're your binoculars, your spotting scope, your field guide. And if you're black, you're going to need probably 2 or 3 forms of ID.
That was Dr. J. Drew Lanham, professor at Clemson University, poet and birdwatcher. He will be Ken Gale's guest along with local birder Chris Cooper on the next Ecologic at 8 p.m. right here on WBAI New York, 99.5 FM and WBAI.org on the web.
Coming up next is Ecologic with yours truly, Ken Gale, and we'll be talking about nature for everybody. And you're listening to WBAI New York, 99.5 FM and WBAI.org. And now we have most of you who listen to Ecologic regularly know that I'm a birder, and I have been a birder for a long time. And one of my guests you've heard on Ecologic several times, Chris Cooper. Welcome back, Chris.
Thanks, Ken. Happy to be here.
And the other is a professor from Clemson University and a published poet, and he's a birder himself, Dr. J. Drew Lanham. Welcome to WBAI.
Thanks, Ken. How are you?
All right.
Good.
Dr. Lanham gave a talk at the Lanham Society, which is a birding group, hardcore. I mean, really hardcore birders, much more hardcore than, say, the Audubon Society. And it was, Dr. Lanham, you were so eloquent, and you presented birding in a way with experiences that I have never had. And I played part of your video when you say what the essential tools of birding are. Why don't you go into that again?
Well, Ken, and again, thank you for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. And it was a pleasure to meet you at the Lanham Society a few weeks back. Yeah, that video, that the 9 rules for the black bird watcher, for the black birder, really sort of encapsulate my life as a birder of a different sort. And so, sort of those rules that are there, people ask, where did you come up with those rules? Really, I've thought about them for quite a while. When Orion magazine asked me to do that piece for the enumeration section of their wonderful magazine that deals with nature and culture, they gave me a couple of weeks to work on it, and I remember I sent a draft back to the enumerations editor within about an hour, because it was stuff that I'd lived, that I'd thought about, and even though it's satire, but there are things that many of us that we think about as birders of color, as black birders specifically. But I think the power of it is that other people, for example, women could pick some of that up and say, well, yeah, I'm thinking about how maybe I'm limited in my activities by some of these things that other people don't have to deal with, that a white male may not have to deal with. So that's where they came from, and of course I tried to link them to culture, to how we go through our lives on a daily basis, then the news stream that impacts us. So at the time, this was pretty close to the Trayvon Mullen tragedy, and so that tragedy and hoodies, and sort of the prohibition on hoodies that became a real thing, and what they mean symbolically, I thought was important to point out, so that people understand that as much as I love birds, as much as birding and bird adoration is a part of my life, that ultimately I am always and proudly a man of color, a black man, an African American, and in that skin and being that I exist, birding, bird watching, nature loving, it's something that I do, but a black man is who I am. And so where those two things converge, I want people to understand that there are issues that sometimes emerge.
If I could jump in for just 1 second, Ken, I think there's a key point that's not been spoken yet. I mean, it's pretty clear from what Dr. Lanham just said, but since we're in radio, the point is that both Dr. Lanham and myself are African American. So, to get that out there.
There we go. There we go. This might be a little dangerous, Chris. On the same airwave, two of us, we're comprising a significant portion, I think, of black birders on radio right now.
I know, like 10% of the North American black birder population, black male birder population anyway. We might achieve critical mass and spontaneously combust or something.
Right, exactly. Or that someone's tapped into the line and somehow now we're being, I don't know, can we be blackballed? I guess we can.
Now, Chris was telling me that he knows Dr. Lanham through reputation, and that Chris's experiences are different, and there's good reasons for that.
Well, I mean, I grew up in the North, in the New York metro area. I was born in Manhattan. I grew up in the suburbs on Long Island. And not to say that there's not, systemic or obvious, blatant racism in these places.
Clemson University is in South Carolina.
Yes, and that's where Dr. Lanham grew up, was in the South. I'm a northern boy, and my experiences are I think, somewhat different. As far as birding goes, my experiences are really being fostered by the people around me, white people mostly, because when I started birding with South Shore Audubon Society out on Long Island, and here was this little black kid showing up brought by his father because he was obsessed with birds, and the Jewish guy who ran the walks took one look at me and was like, took me under his wing and brought me up, so to speak, exactly. So that was sort of my experience of birding. I've never run in. That's not true. But I feel like the barriers that maybe Dr. Lanham faced aren't the same ones that I faced. But that said, always in the back of my mind is what he was talking about, specifically, when Amadou Diallo was killed here in New York City in a hail of 41 police bullets because he tried to pull out his wallet to show them identification. Innocent, unarmed black guy on his own doorstep.
Right.
It became very clear to me that, and this was before my dad had given me my 50th anniversary gift of a pair of very expensive Swarovski green binoculars. I was using a beat-up old pair of black metal binoculars and was frequently in Central Park, skulking around in the bushes to, trying to find some rare bird with a black metal object in my hands.
Oh, boy.
And I'm like, and I was very much aware of the fact that regardless of the fact that there are, 200 other birders doing the same thing, if anyone gets shot, it's going to be me. So, that's something you have to be aware of.
I mean, I've gone birding with Chris, and my first description of Chris to anybody is he's one of the best ear birders I know.
Thank you. That's very generous.
I know you've told me I'm not that good, and you're one of the best, and most people will say the same thing behind your back, I guess. Chris hears a bird and he knows what it is, and he knows what it is instantly. And I noticed in one of the videos of Dr. Lanham that you're a very good ear birder also. And I am not, so I really envy those of you who are. But I think about that, and I'm like, oh, so you'll hear a bird and you go chasing after it. And I would imagine your first thought is, oh, I want to see that, and not realizing, nothing about Amadou Diallo when you're, chasing something.
I just thought of the perfect title for your book when you write it, Chris. Mm-hmm. The Green Binoculars.
Yeah, maybe that's why my dad gave them to me as a 50th birthday gift to keep me alive.
Well, it's little things like that though, that go through your mind, and northerner or southerner, there are all these triggers And as birders, just as we watch birds and think about sort of putting together these pieces, what on a sort of an instantaneous sort of guess at first, and so this gestalt that a bird may present, that we may not see that bird clearly. We may not see every wing bar. We may not see every behavior, but we see enough of different parts to put the bird together to say, I don't know, American robin or Blackburnian warbler or whatever that bird might be. And so really gestalt and understanding gestalt and chasing these birds is, in some ways, it's a profile. It's how we profile these birds. But as birders, as black birders, no matter where you are, you also understand that you may be watched in sort of a different way. You understand that your gestalt, if you're holding some black metallic object, that the first thought that goes through someone's mind is not likely to be, oh, that's just another birder with binoculars. Or even if they're identified as binoculars, what are you doing here? Who are you watching? And so all of those are things that sort of transcend where we are in many instances to come down to who we are. And so, like Chris, I was fostered primarily, almost exclusively, really by white birders. Excuse me. You know, I go back, I sort of turn the knob back to early times and thinking about my grandmother, who was the first person I ever saw feed birds, and appropriately Southern, she fed the birds grits. Just grits out of the bag, because these were juncos. At the time we called them slate colored juncos, but dark-eyed juncos that she calls snowbirds. And even as a kid, as a small boy, I was always imagining that somehow a snow bunting was going to show up with these juncos. But my grandmother would throw out a handful of these grits. And she said it was because she pitied the bird. And so that was a great part of my start in sort of this understanding and this bird adoration. But then from that point on, I think about my white friend in second grade, Carl Montgomery, who I palled up with. And this young man, this boy at that time, I'm sure he had no idea what he was doing, that he was really, and I'm sure he noticed that I was black. I noticed that he was white. But the birds helped us sort of transcend any external difference so that we came to understand that we had this great sort of meeting, this convergence to understand what birds were and to appreciate them. So, but Carl could go through the world in a different way than I went through the world. And so that's something that as a 50-something-year-old birder now, and having done this since I was, as long as I can remember, so I said 8, you know, and I think about that, that's 47, almost 47 years that I've been doing this. And I think it's important for folks to understand this wonder that birds bring to all of us, regardless of our background, of our ethnicity, of our gender, non-gender designation, of who we are, that birds can transcend that, but to understand that we all have these sort of burdens to bear that Chris brings in. And and thinking about the binoculars that you have, whether or not you pull out a pair of black binoculars, a pair of green binoculars, or any other color, it's something that we think about that others may not ever think about.
And I want to add to what Dr. Lanham just mentioned. I mean, he talks about how you go through the world differently, and that got brought home to me recently when I ran into a bunch of birding friends in the North Woods of Central Park, and they had just come back from a trip to Texas to see all these wonderful birds. And Texas has some great birding spots. And they were telling me, oh yeah, we go every year. We saw this, all these great birds. And they said, you should come with us next year. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't do Texas. I am a black, gay, non-Christian. I am not ending up dragged behind the back of a truck.
Wow.
I've lived in Texas. It's not all that bad.
Well, but it's different.
You know what?
Yeah, but you're black and I'm not.
But see, Chris and I share this Texas thing because there are parts of Texas. I've spent a good bit of time down in South Texas and San Antonio and the Hill Country finding golden cheek warblers, but I don't bird East Texas. I don't bird the big thicket areas. I don't bird places anywhere close to Vidor, because a man was dragged behind a truck there until his head came off, and I have never forgotten that. You haven't forgotten it either, have you, Chris?
No, well, that's what I'm talking about. Exactly that.
Yeah, and so I talk a lot about these range maps that we have as human beings that I think from a conservation standpoint are important, but I sort of took this tack of thinking about where I would go or where I can go and where I don't go.
And the irony, I was just going to say the irony is that it almost harks back to the bad old days when we needed a green book as African Americans to travel, where we could stay, where we couldn't stay, where it was safe for us to go. And, the whole idea of sundown towns where you had to be out before sundown. In a way, we still carry those mental maps with us as birders of places where we think we will be safe and where we won't be.
Yeah, I don't, as good as the birding can be, and I've birded the Pacific Northwest a good bit, have some great friends out there. I don't go to the panhandle of Idaho because of Hayden Lake and that past history of this separatist state. I have to think carefully about where I am on the eastern side of the Cascades out west. I can almost name, because I spend a lot of time on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map, I am constantly looking and assessing. I was so surprised on this wonderful, wonderful trip to western Pennsylvania and my initial trip to Hawk Mountain, where I spent a great deal of time with my lovely friend Dan Kunkel there. And in that Mecca that birders flock to, pardon the pun, I was surprised in western Pennsylvania how many Confederate flags I saw. And so it just constantly brings to mind in upstate New York or in all of these places where we go that some people hear a bird or see a bird and chase the bird without thinking. Well, I hear the bird, I see the bird, but it's adaptive as a human animal to understand your surroundings, and you don't chase blindly, no matter how rare the bird might be. And so, my God, if ivory-billed woodpeckers showed up in Vidor, Texas, guess what? I'm going to have to wait. Wow. I'm not going there.
I don't want to create too dark a picture of birding as an African American. If there are any black people out there listening to this, I want to, and I say this as a board member of New York City Audubon, an organization that's trying to reach out to as many communities as possible. And we just had bird walks out on Governor's Island entirely in Spanish. And we're just trying to broaden our membership and reach communities that don't normally think of birding or birds or nature in general as sort of part of what they're about. It is absolutely what we are about. It is more ours than anyone else's. Don't anyone tell you otherwise. Even if you have to carry the mental maps that Dr. Lanham and I were just talking about, go out into your own city park, go out into your own backyard if you have one, and just embrace the nature, because it is part and parcel of who we are, and it makes us stronger, especially us as African Americans who, were uprooted from our ancestry and cut off from those ties. We can restore some of that psychological scarring by bonding with the nature here, with the land here, that is ours as much as anybody else's. So I just want to really stress how healing and wonderful that can be, to be birding, to be out in nature as an African American. And enough of us just don't do it. We sort of give it up as if it's not ours to other people. It is absolutely ours.
And you're listening to you're listening to Ecologic on WBAI New York 99.5 FM and WBAI.org. Ecologic is on every other Tuesday from 8 to 9, from Teokas to Ghost Horse to Out FM. I'm Ken Gale.
I'm Donna Stein.
I'm Chris Cooper.
And on the phone we have
Drew Lanham.
And I was funny, Chris, you anticipated the question I was going to ask right after my station ID, which is the healthy effects of nature, physical and mental, and a lot of people would say emotional and spiritual health of being in nature, and that is why Dr. Lanham's talk at the Lanham Society hit me so hard, because I'm thinking about people I know and people who are listening to Ecologic every week who feel that they can't take advantage of the healing effects of nature.
Nonsense. I had to edit myself and change the word I was actually going to use. Nature is everywhere. It is in the middle of this most urban of cities. I mean, I go up to my roof in the middle of Manhattan in the East Village, and one Sunday morning in the summer, about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a red-tailed hawk perched about 2 roofs over. And then all of a sudden I hear click, 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 click. And there's an American kestrel, our smallest falcon in the East. And he's pissed off that this red-tailed hawk is there, and he's strafing him like a little fighter jet. And then I hear click, 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 click. Another kestrel comes in, and they're tag teaming this red tail. One comes in and takes a swoop at him. The other one takes a swoop at him. And then all of a sudden they stop, and they just sit there. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? Then I hear a peregrine falcon comes in and starts strafing the red tail. Then I hear another peregrine comes in. Meanwhile, the kestrels are sitting on the sidelines saying, I'm having no part of this.
I love it.
And I'm like, where's my popcorn? This is in the middle of Manhattan, in the East Village. I'm sitting on my roof witnessing the spectacle. Nature is everywhere. You just got to tune into it. Right before I came to this show, I was up on my roof. I'm lucky enough to have access to the roof. I have a garden up there, and to my delight, I had a red admiral butterfly and a spring azure butterfly flying around in the garden. I'm like, yes, victory! Finally, the butterflies are starting to show. So, it's everywhere. You just got to tune into it and open yourself to it.
And
it is. It's one of the things that we talk about, that I love to talk about, is, and it's a cliche when we talk about meeting people where they are. And so, in all of my work and thinking about how you color this conservation conversation, how you broaden birding, how you become more inclusive in all of it, there are several things to remember. Yes, indeed, it belongs to all of us that what affects one affects the other. We can talk about canaries in the coal mines. We can talk about same air, same soil, same water. We can talk about this way that all cultures across time have adored, have worshipped birds, have thought about, I think, this untethering from this gravity-bound existence to be able to fly. After all, angels do have wings ultimately. And so as we think about those kinds of things, and I like to think, sort of in my mind, as I'm thinking about my life as a Black American, this is a part of what I like to think of as ecological reparation, in that there is gain to be made, and redress to be addressed in claiming what belongs to us, what some would have us believe we don't appreciate, but certainly to understand how those things, how we are so intimately connected to it. And so I think one of the things that's important as we talk about birds and what birding brings to us, and I'm sitting at the top of the world as far as South Carolina is concerned today are near it on this promontory knob called Caesar's Head, and there are peregrine falcons breeding there in that place that are probably descendants of birds that I helped hack back in the late 80s when I was working for DNR.
What does
and
that
I think
mean?
about the work that the hacking is raising fledgling peregrine falcons in an enclosure in the area where you hope that they eventually habituate and then return to breed.
And one of the
And
reasons, just to give background, one of the reasons why that was necessary is because DDT got into the ecosystem, the pesticide that was being used on crops, got into the ecosystem, went up the food chain, entered birds who were near the top of the food chain, predators like peregrine falcons and bald eagles, and it had the effect of thinning out their eggshells so that when they tried to brood their eggs, sit on their eggs, the eggs cracked and broke apart.
That was a large part of the reason why the bald eagle up in upstate New York were dying off, and Clearwater led the way to stop the DDT and save the eagles.
And the peregrine falcon went extinct as a breeding species in the eastern United States. So that's why people like Dr. Lanham had to hack them, raise fledglings, trying to restore the population in the East Coast. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to give background.
Oh, no. Thank you for that.
Okay, I interrupted
thank
you.
you for that, Chris. Wonderful lesson. Wonderful. It's here's the thing, that all of that work that I did as an individual is just a small part. All the work that Chris does in taking people out, all of the time that we spend doing this, that we practice our passion, whether it's for pay, and most of the times not. And quite frankly, here's the big secret. Most of what I would do without pay. So don't tell anybody that. But all of that is something for us to claim. And whether it's birds or butterflies or boulders, these are all ways for us to appreciate connections to Mother Earth, to the soil and the water and the air, and all of those things that nurture us, that we should be nurturing. And so that's the beautiful thing about it to me. And I think about my first time birding in Central Park with Jason and Jeffrey Ward, and Chris. Somehow we missed one another on that trip.
I know. One of these days.
One of these days we're going to exchange. We're gonna get to exchange birding trips, and me come up there and you come down here, and I'll get to show you things like swallowtail kites and maybe
no more.
hearing black rail. and
Mississippi
plan.
kites.
It's a wonderfully transcendent thing that birds do for us, that they can do for us if we give them the opportunity and we sort of loose the reins of prejudice that hold us back. And even within our own community, sort of for people to understand that there are no limits, that there are no things that we should say, oh, do black people do that? Do brown people do that? Yeah, everybody does that. There's the potential for everybody to do anything wonderful.
Except for skiing.
And so
it's in our handbook. Black people don't ski.
But, hey, you know what? Here's the thing. Break convention. Break convention. If you think that we don't, be the first.
Yep.
And then you'll be pleasantly surprised to find out that there's somebody out there, who does that. Who's turned the selector knob and said, you know what? Hey, I'm going to do that today. Because why? Because I love doing it and it makes me feel good.
Now, Dr. Lanham, you mentioned Jason and Jeffrey Ward, and I just want to mention to folks listening that they're doing something wonderful to actually counteract some of the problems we've been talking about facing black birders in a very subtle way. But they have this wonderful YouTube program, YouTube channel called Birds of North America. And it's all about birding and going out. I've been on it as a 5-second guest. And I know, Dr. Lanham, you had like a whole episode that you were with them. And these two guys happen to be black. And they're very young and they're very talented, very gifted birders. But they're talking about birding. But in the fact that they are African American and talking matter-of-factly about all these things about birding and bringing in other black birders like myself, like Dr. Lanham, they're opening the eyes of so many people to the fact that, oh yeah, black people do bird, and black people should be birding. It's a wonderful show for anybody, black, white, gray, I don't care what you are. So check out Birds of North America on YouTube. It's fantastic.
And Chris,
it is an absolutely fantastic show.
One of the things that I always ask you when you come onto Ecologic is to talk about why you love birding so much, because you codified it as the 7 joys of birding.
I did. This is one of my claims to fame that I have to bear for the rest of my life. Well, first and foremost, the 7 pleasures of birding. Where it came from was my friends who knew I would totally diss them and not have anything to do with them from about the middle of April until the end of May, because I was obsessively birding the spring migration in Central Park. And they would say to me, I don't get it. What's all this birding about? And I said, all right, I'm tired of getting this question. This is why birding is so great. Number 1, the beauty of the birds. And Ken has very happily given me a cheat sheet because inevitably when I try to do this on the fly, I forget 1 or 2. So,
like the 7 dwarfs, you always forget one of them.
The first and foremost is the beauty of the birds. The second is the joy of being in a natural setting. It's just so soothing and so calming and so many beautiful things you see. Number 3 is the joy of hunting, but without the bloodshed, because you've got to stalk the bird. You've got to try to get in such a position that you can actually see it. And then number 4 is the joy of puzzle solving, in that when you have a bird and you don't know what it is, you've got to bring all your mental faculties and all your skills of observation into play to get all those cues that will let you sort out what the bird is. I spent about 45 minutes looking at a flycatcher when I was birding in Buenos Aires. In this park, they have sort of like Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge right in the middle of the city. And I would not let that bird go. I lost it. I couldn't find it. I tracked it down again. Finally figured out it was a brand-colored flycatcher. And the sense of victory I got from that was tremendous. Number 5 is the joy of collecting, almost like stamp collecting. For example, in the spring, everybody's out to get the warblers, and you want to make sure you get all the warblers that pass through Central Park. So it's
taking pictures of them.
No, just observing them.
Just
You just want to make sure you've seen all of them every spring. And my great tragedy this spring is that I got all the rarities except for the cerulean warbler. I was 5 minutes too late to see an eye-level cerulean warbler. Otherwise, I got the rarest of the rare.
Eye level,
I know. They're normally at the tops of trees. Anyway, I don't want to bore you too much. And then the 6th is the joy of scientific discovery, because you learn so many things just being out there observing these birds. One example, I was walking through the woods in the Hudson Valley, and I flushed up an indigo bunting, beautiful all blue bird. And it perched on the branch, and it started beating its bill against the branch. And I'm like, well, what is it doing? Is it trying to clean its bill? What's going on? And then finally I realized I was too close to its nest. And what it was doing was it wanted to be beating its bill on my head because it was so pissed off at me. But I'm too big. So it was redirecting its aggression and beating its bill on the branch. So there's all these wonderful, amazing things you learn like that. And then finally, the 7th, and this is the best one, is what I call the unicorn effect. Because after you've been birding for a little while, there are birds that you know about, you've seen them in the book, you've heard about them, but you've never actually seen them. So they sort of take on this mythological status. Like the one for me for a long time was the quetzal. It's an incredible bird of mountainous areas in Central America with iridescent green back and 2-foot-long tail plumes that extend back and a ruby red chest. Just an incredible bird, but I'd never seen it. I just knew about it. I'd seen pictures. I'd seen it in the book. And then one day, you'll be walking through the forest or whatever habitat, and suddenly this bird that you've only known of through legend, flap, 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 and it lands in front of you, and you see it. And it is the most incredible, breathtaking feeling. So those are the 7 joys of birding. Sorry, I should have been more concise.
I'm going to take listener phone calls in a little while, but Dr. Lanham, you're a published poet. You have anything to add to what to Chris's 7 joys?
Well, I agree with each and every one of them, and I am jealous because I have not experienced quetzalness. But
it
for
took me 3
it's
trips
this,
to Costa Rica before I finally got it. So,
well, and that's part of the to me that's part of the charm in birding anywhere, tropics or northern prairie or Arctic. But for me, it comes down to for all birds to 4 letters, LOVE, and it's always this. I like to call it, this barter. These bits of affection traded for pieces of adoration. That birds give you that birds by song, by sight, and sometimes by imagination, imagining trans-Gulf migrants. These birds that have jumped off of the Yucatan Peninsula on some night, following stars, following instinct, on the faith of lift and thrust, and hopefully a tailwind that they push across that watery abyss. And that when they land, if they are fortunate enough to have survived that journey, that peregrination, that those birds, you see this one bird, maybe it's a scarlet tanager, that is in your binocular view, to imagine not going on quickly to the next bird that you can list, but thinking for a moment of that bird having just maybe a couple of weeks before being on some Andean slope, that some of the birds that you were seeing look down upon jaguar and look down upon caiman and have flown across these seas. It's epic to me. And so every bird is a poem. Every bird is just this verse in this odyssey that we get a chance to see. And so that's the wonder of it. That's those 7 joys that Chris so eloquently and poetically expresses. All of those things are wrapped up in each and every bird.
I couldn't agree more. And correct me if I'm wrong, don't little tiny hummingbirds, ruby-throated hummingbirds, cross the Gulf in a single flight?
Yes.
Yes. That's astonishing to me.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's that just. I mean, if you want to try an exercise with kids or with adults, really, it's quite fun. Is you stand them up and you say, "Okay, guys, we're gonna cross the Gulf now." So, what you're gonna do is you're gonna stand up and you're gonna flap your arms for the next 12 hours. Just do that. Just stand there and do that. And then you offer some fantastic prize for anyone who could do it for an hour or 30 minutes or 10 minutes. And you find it nearly impossible. So one of the ways that I like to get to kids is to talk to them about sort of this super heroic nature of the birds that we watch. And it's not just those things from the tropics. I'll be honest, I marvel over pigeon flight and just how strong and direct that is through a canyon of concrete and glass. I marvel at murmurations of starlings. Starlings didn't ask to be here, so I don't hate on them. They are wonderfully evolved and adapted beings that were brought here by someone else for the purpose of trying to have all of Shakespeare's birds in North America. And that started in Central Park, right? That's how the story goes.
It did.
So it amazes me that people can cry over murmurations and that will go to see them and that they're set to music on YouTube, and then they will hate and despise and almost spit on starlings. And I'm like, back off, appreciate who this bird is. And so ecologically, I understand the conflict, but I think that's also a question that we're beginning to ask. When we ask the question of who belongs, of what belongs, we're asking the question of what belongs. And so that's part of the fun, in part, of this journey as a scientist and a nature observer, is we're beginning to think in different ways in this changing world about what surrounds us and what should and should not surround us. And I think that's a lot of grist for further discussion.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention when you mentioned having a group of people trying to flap their arms. I've actually done that with school children. I actually have them jog in place, and I'm like, okay, you've got to cross the gulf. Keep jogging, keep jogging. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that's one of the things that we're doing with New York City Audubon to try to bring more people of all kinds, of all backgrounds into birding. Is we have a program called Feathered Friends that goes into the schools. It's an after-school program where the students can learn about birds and get out into the field and do their birding. So, and that's close and near and dear to my heart because it's the program I started. So I'm all about Feathered Friends and getting the students and getting the kids, starting them early, getting them
If
hooked.
somebody wants to get involved in that, how do they contact you?
They should contact New York City Audubon, nycaudubon.org.
NYC Audubon. Spell Audubon because people tend to spell like it's a German highway.
Yes. Sorry. AUDUBON.
NYC
AUDUBON.
Nice rhythm to that.
I heard the most beautiful bird. I've never heard that song before. Right outside of the Lower East Side 6th Avenue Community House. And it's like, how do I wish I had your ears to hear what it was because I'd never heard that song before. So I said, I wish I could see that bird so I could tell Ken about it. I take a picture of a bird anytime I see it and send it to Ken.
You have no idea how being attuned to birds by ear changes your perception of reality because you can't turn it off. So no matter where you are, you're getting a constant stream of information of what's around you. I was walking down 9th Avenue the other day in the middle of traffic and construction, and I heard just a faint little click, 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 and I looked up, and sure enough, there was a kestrel flying high over me, and you just can't turn it off. It completely changes how you experience the world.
And how you experience city streets.
Yeah.
Like you said, nature is everywhere. And you just have to look for it.
I think Mercy, Ken's wife, is also very good at hearing the birds.
She's good at hearing the birds, and she's also very good at imitating them. So we'll be on a bird walk with Don Ripe, who's been a long time. He's been birding for about 300 or 400 years, and Major Jamaica Bay, and he doesn't hear all the sounds. And she'll hear them go, "What's this?" And then she'll imitate it. And so we're running around Forest Park in Queens from one place to another, chasing after the ones that she imitated. That it's like, wait a minute, it's a fairy warbler. Where did you hear that? And it was quite a treat. And all the other birders are like, wow. But again, she's got this great vocal range. But yeah, no, the two of us make a great birder because she can, she's good at seeing them, but not as good at identifying them. But Chris does all of those things.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think all of us do our best. And the nice thing about Birding Central Park is we've got a wonderful sharing community. Nobody gives a damn who you are or where you're from, just as long as you know the birds, or if you don't know the birds, you're interested in learning about the birds. And we all share the birds. Yeah. And I really like our Central Park birding community.
Well,
it's a real nice
I brought a new birder to Central Park, and everybody was like, "You're a new birder?" And they just couldn't wait to show her birds. And they're like, they're taking time out of their birding in order to show me things. And I'm like, well, we'll never see this for the first time again, except through you.
Yep.
It's the closest we'll ever get to a first time. And so yeah, it's a wonderful community. Apparently, from what travelers tell me, one of the best in the world.
Yay, go us.
Go us, So
it's pretty awesome. My first time, I'll tell you, was incredible. Again, being out there with Jeffrey and some other friends, but then meeting people and seeing people from the Lanham Society the night before. But I've taken this tack, and I've seen birds all over the world, and one of the things that I now tell people is that every day I see a bird, no matter what it is, it's a life bird for me. And there are different perspectives on that, but being fortunate to be alive on this earth, for all of the bad things that are happening right now, you can watch a bird, whether it's a robin or a cardinal or a pigeon or a murmuration of starlings, with any bird, and have some appreciation for life. And so every time you see that bird, Chris did not ignore that. He didn't ignore it because he had seen it before. He looked up and adored, and it's like, oh my God, there's an American kestrel, and it's just an amazing renewal of spirit. It's a way to reset. And birds give that to us free of charge.
One other very important point is that, as much as I love Central Park and our community, any park can be a wonderful source of seeing birds. There always are birds wherever you go. There's Prospect Park, which is, we don't like to admit it, even better for birding than Central Park. And then there's Shirley Chisholm State Park that just opened in Brooklyn. I mean, talk about reaching out to African-American birders. This is a park that is named for an African-American hero. And it's just opened, I think, today. And it's a wonderful place to go look for birds. So,
Wow.
Where is it?
It's in Brooklyn. I don't know Brooklyn well enough to say exactly where you have to go, but just Google Shirley Chisholm State Park.
And we have run out of time. The time just zoomed by. Thank you, Dr. J. Drew Lanham from Clemson University in South Carolina, and thank you, Chris Cooper from right here in New York City, for being guest on Ecologic. I'm Ken Gale.
Thank you.
Donna Stein.
And coming up next is Out FM, so you don't want to miss that. So thanks a lot.
I saw a great big tourist bus of folks from out of town.
Every day is Earth Day. I'm Ken Gale.
And I'm Donna Stein.
And this is Ecologic for July 2nd, 2019, here on WBAI New York, 99.5 FM and WBAI.org. When your air or water is clean, thank an environmentalist. If not, become one.
Coming up, European heat wave and nuke plants, New Jersey Transit methane plant, pesticide bill reintroduced, Staten Island Environmental Conference, students protest at Fox News, that's a long time coming, new materials for solar cells, and greenhouse gases and the U.S. military.
You probably heard about the awful heat wave in Europe. You might have heard that many nuclear power plants shut down as a result, as they usually do during heat waves. That's happened in Europe and the United States. Nuclear plants use a tremendous amount of water to keep cool enough so they don't melt down, and during a heat wave, there isn't enough water or the water is too warm to do the job. Another fact showing that nuclear power is no solution to our electricity needs, along with other facts such as cancer clusters and the tremendous use of fossil fuel to keep the waste cool so it doesn't explode.
Now please get out something to write down phone numbers, dates, and websites. New Jersey Transit is using a Superstorm Sandy grant to build their own gas plant. Is that what Superstorm Sandy grants were supposed to be for? I don't think so. This would be in addition to the proposed fracked methane plant nearby. This announcement was 1 week after Governor Murphy's administration released an energy master plan, that is silent on eliminating gas plants. And after 7 New Jersey legislators came out in support of a moratorium on all new fossil fuel projects. Something they're not telling us, folks. Various environmental groups in New Jersey are asking people to call Governor Murphy, preferably between 9 and 5, to express your opposition to the New Jersey Transit's gas plant and demand a moratorium on all new fossil fuel projects. You can call 866-586-4069. I'll give that number again, 866-586-4069.
The bill to protect New York City kids from poisonous pesticides has been rewritten, strengthened, and reintroduced. It's now bill number 1524. www.parksforkidsnyc.org has information, phone numbers, and bill numbers. They want to stop poison from being sprayed in playgrounds, schoolyards, and parks. There is a lot of data on how poisonous these pesticides are, especially to children. www.parksforkidsnyc.org. Call your city council member. Members are on the website. And call Mayor de Blasio at 212-788-7585. 212-788-7585. And that website with all this information, www.parksforkidsnyc.org.
Climate Change and Flooding, Stapleton to Graniteville, is a conference being held on Staten Island. It'll be in Snug Harbor Cultural Centers building from noon to 4 p.m. on Sunday, July 14th. And that is noon to 4, Sunday, July 14th.
There's a 14-year-old named Alexandria Villasenor who was involved with the Friday school strike months ago, and she's been keeping the strike going every Friday with her mom's support. I heard her and her mom both speaking passionately about climate issues about a month ago. Even though school is out, Alexandria is still doing climate actions. Last Friday, she picked that climate-denying network, Fox News, and organized a rally outside their headquarters on 6th Avenue. The attendees were mostly youth, carrying signs and banners in the heat and chanting things like, "Liar, liar, world's on fire, no more coverage of deniers," and "Tell the truth, you owe it to the youth." The only media there was me and someone with a podcast. But that's not why they were there, and it didn't slow them down. Many of the passers-by showed that they were with us.
All right. Greenhouse gases are gases such as carbon dioxide and methane, which when in the air act like the roof of a greenhouse and change some of the sun's light into heat and then trap that heat. That's where most of the global warming part of climate chaos comes from. United for Peace and Justice sent around a new report from the Watson Institute at Brown University detailing the staggering greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S. military, 1.2 billion metric tons. This is equal to 257 million passenger car emissions, more than double the amount of cars on the road in the U.S. The U.S. military is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world.
Materials scientists have been trying to reinvent the solar cell to use less expensive and or less politically volatile materials, and to be more efficient than the current silicon cells. An article in the Journal of Materials Chemistry shows a lot of promise in that direction. If the announcement were only in some press release, we wouldn't include it in Ecologic News until it's happened. But when it's in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, it's much more promising. But we also have a link to an easier-to-read non-journal article, too, on the Ecolinks page.
A video version of most episodes of Ecologic appears on Manhattan Neighborhood Network 2 Sundays after Ecologic airs. Different cable providers have different channels, but they all air NYC at 11 a.m. every other Sunday. Charlie Olson adds great graphics. Thanks, Charlie. If you miss any WBAI show, it'll be on the WBAI.org archives 5 or 10 minutes after the show ends. To read the full articles we summarize in any episode of Ecologic from the past few years, we link to all those articles on the Ecolinks page of the Ecologic website. That's www.ecoradio.org. Our Facebook page is WBAI Ecologic, no spaces or dashes, WBAI Ecologic. And please click like. We need those likes. That is a good thing. For more environment news, go to theenvironmenttv.com, biologicaldiversity.org, insideclimatenews.org, or ecowatch.com. You can find past episodes of Ecologic on many different websites. They all have different shows for you to listen or watch. The WBAI.org archives, the environmenttv.com, and my own, that's Ken's own, permanent archives. www.ecoradio.org is the main Ecologic page and will get you to the past guest page, the Ecolinks page, and our own permanent archives. Ecoradio.org will get you there.
And the next Ecologic will be about what lives in the Hudson River, but also about hydroponics and aquaponics, both the good and bad of it. That's July 16th.
When times grow dark and life grows mean, the hardest times we've